Hey everybody. Today I want to talk to you guys about Ford FE heads and also Ford casting numbers and Ford date codes. There's been a little bit of confusion on this, and I have a couple of 390 heads here off of an FE, off of a couple of different FEs. And so I kind of want to show you the difference. If you're going to build an FE engine, which is a 352, 360, 390, 428, there's definitely some differences in these heads. Even though they will all bolt on, there's definitely some differences in them. So I want to talk about that. So let's take a look at these heads here. So we've got a couple of different cylinder heads here. Now, first of all, let's talk about the casting numbers. So Ford casting numbers are actually pretty easy to decipher. And the nice thing about the Ford casting numbers is if you want to know approximately what year the cylinder heads are, and as you can see, I've got just a few Ford heads. This is probably about 10% of the FE heads that I have. I have a lot of them, and a lot of them are for sale, by the way. So here's the thing. This head here has a casting number, and I wrote it on here. It's C as in cat 6 AE, Apple Edward. So C6AE, and then of course a lot of times there's a dash and a letter. This happens to be a dash U head, which is actually a low performance head. There are C6 heads that are high performance that have better ports than this, but they have a different suffix. The dash letter is different. Over here we have a C4 AE-G head. Okay, so let's decipher this. Let's break this down. So the way that Ford casting numbers works is like this. The first letter in the casting number, the C, is always the decade. Well, with Ford's, C was the decades, the 1960s. D, obviously, was the 1970s. E was the 80s, F was the 90s, and so forth. So the second letter, so we have a 60s era head. The second number, rather, that you have is always going to be the year. So we have a C, which is 64. So this head has a 1964 casting date. If we go over to this head here, it is a C6. So we have a 1966 casting date. The A and the E have to do with, and those aren't nearly as important as the C and the 4, the C and the 6, but they do have meanings to them. E, I believe, is an engine part, and also some of these, you might have one that's like this one here. This is a C6TE instead of AE. The TE, when you have a T there, that was a truck head. So you can look up what the T and the A and all that means, you know, and most of them, of course, the last letter is always going to be E because this is an engine part, right? And then the last letter, or the G, or the dash G, or the dash U, that was actually a kind of a big issue. The last digit does make a difference. There was some significant differences in the heads based on that letter. Here's an example of that. This is a C6AE head. This is what they call a low riser head. So when you deal with 390 heads, you're going to have three different types of heads. You're going to have what they call a low riser, which was just basically a low performance 352, 360, 390 head, had pretty small ports. Then we have what we call a medium riser, which was a pretty common performance head that had a much larger intake port, and in a lot of cases it had higher compression because it had a tighter combustion chamber. And then we have the high riser heads, which has a huge intake port, but the high riser heads are really rare. That was like a 428 Cobra Jet, some of the real hot dog performance engines. And those are very hard to find. There's really not a lot of those around. But if you're going to build a 390 head, you definitely want to find, if you want a pretty decent level of performance, you definitely want to find what we call a medium riser head. Now let me show you what we're talking about when I say that. So this C6 AE head here, 66, right, engine part, dash U, is what we call a low riser head. This is a low performance head. And the reason it is because it has small intake ports here. So let's take a look at these ports and I'll show you a comparison. Now, the reason I set the C4 AE-G head up here is because this is a medium riser head and it is a much better performer than this one here, simply because it has a much larger intake runner and so it breathes. All right, so I've got a set of dial calipers here. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to measure the width of this port, because in this, again, this is our C6 AEU head and this is a low performance head. So if we just take our calipers and we run this in until we just get a pretty close read on the height of that port, you can see I'm right there. There's the height of the port. That's pretty good. And we lock our calipers in place. So this is the height of this port. Now we take this over and we're going to lay it above the riser or the port on this head. And man, you can see the difference there. There's a big difference. So let's actually, what even makes this more obvious of a contrast is, let's go ahead and open our calipers up and let's measure the medium riser port as far as its height goes. So there we are. That's right there. I'm measuring the width of the port. Then we'll take it over and we're going to compare this to our low riser. So we're going to set this up against the low riser head and look at the difference in the height of that port. That is just an absolute staggering difference between the medium and the low riser. So when you're looking for these 390 heads, what you want to do is you definitely want to find the medium riser heads. And there's specific casting numbers, but you kind of got to check this because, like I said, this is a C6 AE-U head with this small port. I have a head on the bench over there that's also a C6, a 66 head, but it's a TE head, which was a truck engine component. It's a different casting number, but it has the large port. So you could literally have the same casting number on an FE head or a similar casting number, the same year head. One's going to be a low riser, low performance, and one will be a medium riser. If you can find the high riser heads, those are great, and they take, you can really get a lot of performance out of those, but you better have very deep pockets if you want to buy a set of high riser 428 Cobra jets, because I think the last set I seen on eBay was like $2,000 for a set of core heads. So, and they're very rare. There's not very many of them. But the medium riser heads, there's you can get them. They're a little more pricey than the low performance heads, but they are out there. I've got a bunch of them for sale actually. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. There is a difference in performance level on these engines. You don't just want to take any FE head and slap it on there. You want to look for the medium riser, the big port. Now, as far as the date codes go, and this can become kind of an issue too if you're building a numbers matching car or something of that nature. I don't know what you're doing, but the date codes on the Fords are actually pretty easy too. So real quickly, let me show you the date codes on these two, and you can decipher them. That way, when you look at them, you can know exactly what year, because even though this says C6 66 and this says C4 64. The thing is, this may have not been a 64 head. It may not have been a 66 head. It all depends on what month of the year it was manufactured, because remember, the manufacturers are going to split their years or their manufacturing dates not by the calendar year but by half of the year. Anything, as a general rule, with all the manufacturers, for example, this is 2017 right now. Well, the manufacturers that are building 2017 vehicles that are on the market today, they actually started building those vehicles last July. They started building them and tooling up for their 2017 cars in July of 2016. So the calendar year and the year that they transition from one year of vehicle to the next is not the same. The year for vehicles usually goes from July to July. So in other words, if I have a head that was manufactured, in this case C6, it was manufactured in 1966, but it was manufactured after July of 1966, it is actually date code correct for a 67 because that would have been on a 67 model year vehicle. If it was manufactured before July of 1966, then it would have actually been on a 66 vehicle. And you know, realistically, you could have a 66 Mustang or Fairlane or whatever you got this in, 66 Chevy truck, and you could have a C5 casting number on it because the C5, even though it was manufactured in 65, it may have been after July of 65, and so it would have gone on to the vehicles that were manufactured for 1966. I hope that makes sense. So if you have to rewind that and listen to it again, you can. Okay, so let's look at these date codes. Look at the date codes on this C6 head. So the date code on this head is 6F1. Now, let me decipher this for you. On the date codes on the Ford, the first number that you see is going to be the year, right? Well, it makes sense. C6, 66. So the second letter is going to be the month. Now, they use a letter to denote the month. That's not February because it says F. You have to count how many letters that is into the alphabet. So A, B, C, D, E, F is 6. F is the sixth letter of the alphabet. So this head was manufactured the 6th month of 1966, which would have been June, right? January, February, March, April, May, June. Yeah. So this head has a casting date of June 1966, and the third number is the day. So they literally give you the day that it was. I don't know if it's the day it was actually. I don't think it was the day that it was put on the car. It was the day that it came out of the foundry because the date code is cast into the head. So it was done at the foundry when they actually cast the head. So this head was cast in June of 1966, and it was June 1st. Now, if we go over to our C4 head, this is interesting because the date code says 5. Wait a minute. This is a C4 head. This is a 64, but it was manufactured in 65. Huh, weird. Okay, so the date code on this is 5, so that is 1965. The month is E, so A, B, C, D, E, which is 5. You see that? So it's the 5th month. So this is the 5th month, which would have been May. So this head was manufactured in May of 1965, and it was manufactured on May 20th of 1965. 65, 5th month, and the 20th day. So it is a 64 or a C4 head because it was manufactured before July of 1965. So they called it a C4. Now what's crazy is I've seen these heads with a very similar casting number in this date range that said C5 here. But it was an early C5, and so it was on a 64. So it was just kind of crazy the way they did this stuff. So basically what you got to remember is anything manufactured before July is going to be the previous year. So in other words, if this was manufactured before July of 65, it's going to be a 64. Even if it said C4 here, but it was manufactured after July, say this E was an L or an M or something, this would be a 1965 calendar year head, or it would be on a 1965 vehicle. So, and I know this is a lot of information and it can get a little bit confusing, and if you have any questions, make sure you ask below. So here's another thing you might run into as well. I've got a couple of heads up here, and if you look at the exhaust bolt pattern on these, so this is the typical 390 truck head, full-size car head, whatever. It had an exhaust bolt pattern here that was very typical of the 390s. It basically had two bolts, one on top and one on the bottom of each exhaust port all the way across. So it had 8 bolts, 4 on top, 4 on the bottom. Now, there was an exception to that, and that would be this head here. So if you look at the exhaust bolt pattern on this, it is obviously completely different. You can see it. This bolt pattern here was actually a head that they called the GT head, and they used this in the Mustangs. Now, because of the constraints of the size of the engine compartment, they actually had to use a special exhaust manifold on these that would actually fit in the car. So on the Mustangs and some of the smaller vehicles, I'm not 100% sure. It might have been in like a smaller Fairlane or something like that too, but I'm not sure on that. But I know for sure the Mustang GTs, they called it the GT. This is literally what they call the GT bolt pattern. So, and these heads are not that common. They're actually worth a little more money because this is actually the correct head for the Mustang GT 390 GT that they made back in the 60s. And so you can see on the side of the head here, we've got, you know, the casting number was C8AE-H, but we've got, gosh, it was a GT. And also, this one has smog written on it, because what you'll notice on some of these is in California, and we'll pull the head over here so you can see it. If it was a car manufactured or sold in California, it actually had smog holes drilled into each exhaust port because of the emission controls restraints in California. So that actually makes this head kind of a sought-after head, because if you're restoring a Mustang that was originally a California car and it has original California plates and you want to keep it all original, you actually would need a head with the correct exhaust bolt pattern, and also for California you would need the smog tubes, the smog holes drilled. Now some guys drill those holes. The bosses are there. If you look on this head over here, you can see that those smog bosses were there. They just weren't drilled because this head was obviously on a vehicle that was either exempt from emissions in California or it wasn't sold in California, which is much more likely that it wasn't sold in California. So that's also something you might want to look out for on these, is the fact that there is a GT version with a special exhaust pattern, bolt pattern over here. Now some of these you can drill. You can see they have the bosses here. This has the boss here and the boss here. Some guys will take a gasket and lay it on here and lay this out and drill them. I've drilled them out before. But that's, you know, and they work, but you got to watch out for that. I mean, if you want it to be an actual original GT head, then it would have to have the right casting numbers and so forth and the bolt hole pattern from the factory. Hopefully that clears up some of the information and some of the confusion that there is about the FE heads. The 390 FE, the 390 FE motor, the 428 FE motor is a really good engine. It was a really solid power plant that Ford made, and they can be built to make really good power. So just keep in mind that you got to look at the date codes and so forth, and you got to make sure you look at those runners. So I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions on this, any more questions, make sure you ask below. If you're a 390 fan, if you're looking for any 390 heads, by the way, I have a ton of them for sale. So, and I can also build them for you if you want to do a complete valve job and put the big valves in and all that. I can do anything to these heads that you need done. But keep in mind, I just want to throw that out there because I do have a very large number of these heads. I probably have 300 or 400 sets of these heads that I've been collecting. So, and I am in the process of trying to sell them. Also, make sure you support this channel. If you like what you see here, go to my Patreon site. It's www.patreon.com/MyVintageIron7512, and there is an address and a link below. I'm asking for $1, $2, $5, $10 a month, so we can do some really cool builds. Engine building is very expensive, and so I'm asking for people that want to support this channel on a monthly basis, a very small amount of money. And I'm also having some really cool giveaways. When we hit the $500 mark, I'm giving away an awesome welding helmet, brand new. It's from Lincoln. At the $1,000 mark, I'm giving away a fully rebuilt set of small block Chevy heads ready to bolt on. At the $1,500 mark, I'm giving away a fully built set of 390 medium riser big valve 390 heads set up for performance. And then at the $2,500 mark, if we get there, I'm giving away a Craftsman toolbox stuffed full of tools that I have hand selected so you can build your engine. So we got some cool stuff coming up, and there's also going to be some content. I actually did reveal the mystery motor to the patrons. I haven't revealed that to the regular YouTube crowd yet, but those of you that have pledged to support me, you already know what that engine is. So don't post that out on YouTube yet. I'm kind of keeping that exclusively for the patrons. You YouTubers, if you choose not to support me, that's fine. You will find out in about a month what that motor, what the mystery motor is. So thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. I'm honestly very overwhelmed at all of the kind comments, the thousands of emails. If we don't respond to you like right away, don't get offended. There's only a couple of us here working on this, and I literally have thousands of messages to sift through. We're doing the best we can. So become a patron, support us, and we're going to do some cool stuff. I'm on the agenda, some LS stuff coming up. We want to do a Hemi, a Chrysler Hemi, a late model Hemi, so all of that stuff. But the thing is, it costs money, man. It's all about being able to afford to do that. So if we get enough support, we're going to start doing cool stuff like that. I appreciate you watching, and I will talk to you very soon, I promise. Keep that in mind. I'm supposed to be talking here. I had a whole spiel laid out that I was going to talk about next, and I just am having a complete brain fart. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be talking about now. Hey, let's talk about the animals at the zoo. Just because I figured we'd have a conversation about that. Okay, edit.